So welcome to the Hammer Media Classroom again. On this lesson, we're going to take a look at how to use jumps in training to develop athletes. So not just jumps for throwers, not just jumps for jumpers, but jumps for developing athletes. We got some videos we're going to post that show different routines for different levels of Nick's progression he uses at Notre Dame High School with his younger athletes and emerging elite athletes. But before we get into that, we wanted to give you a little view of how it looks from the big picture, how the jumping routines came to be, what the basic philosophy is, and how Nick progresses things. So to start off, Nick, what's your general philosophy? I know we've talked about this before on the podcast and in person, but what are you trying to get at with jumps, or what's the value of jumps in a training program?
Well, first off, I want to start with, a lot of this jumping stuff I learned in college from Coach Glenn McAtee. And then I've kind of taken a lot of it and put it in our program and added things to it. So the genesis of the program comes from Glenn McAtee. When I was in college, I added my philosophy to it on how I use them and when and where I think they should be used. Now, there's 3 or 4 different types of jumping things that we do. And the first one is basically medium easy jumps in place and easy jumps moving or with movement or a locomotive movement, I guess you could say. And basically what I'm trying to do here is this is the first thing that we'll do in a PE class. This is the first thing we'll do with freshmen. When I get these freshman kids, not all of them can even skip. So what I'm trying to do is introduce them to a bunch of different movements that they should have done in the past that they never have, and give them a bunch of different stimulus that they have to figure out and have the body figure out on their own. Now, furthermore, lots of people use these jumping routines to say, hey, I want to increase my vertical. Well, I don't think of using plyometrics as increasing vertical jump. I feel that the teams that really need a vertical jump, basketball, volleyball, etc., they're jumping thousands of times during practice in the week. So if I try to do more jumping with them, it'd probably hinder them and maybe even get them hurt, especially if they have club practice at the same time. Therefore, what I use them for are injury prevention, and not only injury prevention, but to get them used to the forces that happen on the field that we can't necessarily simulate on the field because we can't always go live. So when we're doing different types of jumps, we're going in multiple planes. We're doing it moving, we're doing it in place, we're doing it with one leg, we're doing it with 2 legs. So we're really trying to simulate different things that you may happen or see on the field and simulate those forces so we can prepare the body for those forces so nothing happens to them when they do feel those actual forces in the field. And I guess you could call it bulletproofing the athlete.
I mean, it's an interesting point of view because everyone focuses on plyometrics as power development, explosive development, and it definitely has a role there. But as you mentioned, it's also a huge it makes athletes robust. A lot of people are afraid to use jumps because they're afraid of injuries, but it's quite the opposite. If you do jumps right, you can reduce injuries.
Absolutely, and the reason why the progression the way it is we'll have the different types of movements in place and moving that are easy movements, what we consider easy, then in all 3 planes. Then we'll move into jumps on top of boxes, different heights or varying heights, usually in ascending order, starting with the smallest box, maybe 6 to 12 inches, and moving from 6 to 12 to 24, or 6 to 12 to 18 to 24 to 30, maybe even up to upwards of 36. And once they get comfortable doing on top of boxes, then we'll move to going over boxes. And if they can't go over all the boxes, what they'll do is they'll go over every box until they can't get over them, and they'll jump on top of them. And after they get done with a cycle of that, we'll move into maybe some hurdle work, and they'll jump over hurdles. Because obviously hurdles aren't probably as forgiving as a box. I mean, if you miss jumping over a box, just jump on top of it. But if you miss jumping over a hurdle, then you probably got a problem. So jump over hurdles, and jumping over hurdles will add a sprint afterwards. We'll add more jumping movements afterwards. Like, for example, we'll go over a hurdle to a triple jump, like an actual track and field triple jump. We'll go over a hurdle to a standing long jump. We'll go over 2 hurdles and do a backwards heave with the med ball. And same thing with the boxes. We'll go over 2 boxes and do front heaves, over boxes and do a lateral jump. Different things like that to change up the stimulus. And not only do we do the progression that way, but I also, at the very beginning of the season, those those jumps that are in circuits that are easy jumps in place, and easy jumps moving, have a high volume, have a high contact rate, and therefore, most of the time you have high volume at the beginning of the season. As you move along, the volume in jumping goes lower, 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 lower. It's just like the med ball throws go lower, 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 and lower. And as you get more closer to the bigger meets or the big meet, they get more specific and more explosive. So, for example, it's not realistic to think that, we're going to go from star jumps to scout power skis for height to ankle hops to speed skaters to power skis for distance right away. That's not how it is in competition. What we'll do is we'll change to something more explosive and rhythmical, like a throw would be, a jump over a hurdle with a standing long jump. So there's two components there: the jump over the hurdle and then the standing long jump, which there's two components of a throw: the entry and the finish. It gets, not only does it get more explosive, I guess you could say it gets more specific.
Yeah, and also, so a couple things I want to point out um, from the exercises is you have a whole variety of different movements. So it's not just different variations of one movement. You have a whole bunch of different varieties. And as you mentioned, you're trying to put athletes in different positions. So you have a mix of unilateral and bilateral exercises. You have different planes you're hitting. So you have frontal jumps and you're trying to hit the different planes of movement. Not always as much as some. I mean, obviously doing some planes of movements are going to be much more frequent in jumping.
Transverse plane, we do transverse plane. It's interesting because in the core movements we talk about all the time, we do more transverse plane movements because that's what's more specific to the throw. But jumping wise, number one, they're harder to do because there's not many you can do on a transverse plane. The only thing we can basically do is 360 chest passes is what we do on a transverse plane.
Yeah. But I mean, you hit the other planes, but you're trying to get people in different positions. And correct me if I'm wrong, but there's less of a focus on the actual technique that people are using for jumping. And it's more about getting the jumps done. So I was talking with, I was recording a podcast with Vern Gambetta and Bill Knowles recently, and he was talking about his approach, which is sounds quite similar. And he said, we're trying to get people in different movements and different positions. And, I get a lot of coaches ask me, they say, you're landing, they'll do a jump and stick, and the landing position here, the angle's not quite ideal, or this and that. He goes, I don't really care. I want the athlete to do that, and frankly, if they're in the same position every time when they land, that's not helping me. I want them to be in slightly different positions when they're landing each time, so that they build up that robustness and they get a little bit stronger overall. If you're just trying to get that perfect technique every single time, then you're not creating the transfer of those movements to other movements are not going to be as good. Does that sound similar to also your approach, or are you focusing on the?
I'm fully on board on that. Coach Knowles also has he'll have a guy standing someplace, excuse me, and a guy will run and do a jump, and he'll have his guy push him, and so they have to land awkwardly or differently than they normally would, like they would in a game. All these jumping progressions that you see, these so-called combine prep places do, where they're landing specific waves and looking at the shin angle and stuff like that. To me, that's a bunch of crap because you think they're worried about the shin angle when they go up for a rebound and come back down again? They're not thinking about where their shin angle is. They're not thinking about where their knees at or their ankles at. They're just getting the ball and coming down, just like kids, right? So that's why we're putting all these kids in different positions and doing different jumps, is because we're trying to cover all those different angles and different areas, because it's not going to be the same every single time. If it was, it'd be no fun. And number two, it would be a closed environment, not an open environment. So make things completely easy and boring.
Exactly, because what happens if you're in that game, you come down from a rebound and you land in the not perfect position that you've never been in before. If you've only tried to reach that exact perfect position in training, you're more likely to break. But if you try to reach different positions in training, the more likely you're just going to be able to withstand all those different positions you meet on the field.
Yeah, absolutely right. Yep.
Another point, you mentioned it earlier, but just to give people a visualization of it, we have your two basic jump routines for the first level. You have 8 to 10 exercises, something like that. 10 reps or so per jump. All of a sudden you get 80 to 100 contacts in the span of 3 minutes, 5 minutes. I don't know. It's a pretty short
Yeah,
amount of time.
yeah,
So
3 to 5 minutes. Yep.
you get a huge volume of jumps in, and they're not hard jumps. They're not always all out. They're, especially at the first level, you're intentionally trying to do low amplitude, easier jumps, but you get a ton of contact, and that has a lot of value. You can do a standing long jumps if you want, but you're not going to be able to do 80 to 100 standing long jumps in a training session with any quality. But if you do some lower amplitude and you work in some variety of movements, you can get a lot of work in just a little bit of time. So it doesn't have to you don't have to a whole training session dedicated to jumps. You can throw it in once or twice a week, and that volume adds up. Like everything, it adds up.
And we mentioned Bill Knowles a bunch, but one of his philosophies is invest $1 a day. You invest $1 a day in plyometrics, invest $1 a day in med ball throws, invest $1 a day in warm it up. All that stuff accumulates, and so all of a sudden you have lots of money invested and lots of different training invested in different areas.
So you mentioned your 4 levels. You have level 1, easy jumps in place and moving. Level 2 is jumps over boxes and hurdles. Sorry, jumps onto boxes and hurdles. Level 3 is over boxes and hurdles. Level 4 is over boxes and hurdles, and you combine that with either medicine ball or a sprint. So you got those 4 levels, and you said you typically work in them in blocks. So you'd have 4 weeks each, and that combines to 16 weeks. But each year or each training cycle, you'll come back to all 4 of those levels. So it's not that, okay, the beginners, they get the easy stuff. Next time we just start at level 2 or we start at level 3. You're going back to square one with athletes all the time, right?
Absolutely, because some say you build a foundation, you need to go back to the foundation again. Well, jumping's a little bit different because, like I said, we're not only doing the jumping to, I guess you could say people do vertical to improve the vertical jump. We're doing the jumping for injury prevention and to exploit them to forces that they're not used to being exploited to. So we're going to come back to that every cycle, or not every cycle, but let's say every 16 weeks, we'll say.
Yeah, there's a value in variation too, because if you're just doing the same jumps over and over, and I see there's a lot of elite athletes, they just do hurdle hops. They'll do sets of 5 hurdle hops. They might vary the height a little bit of the hurdle, but if you're doing the same thing over and over, then as with anything in training, you're going to stop progressing. You need some variation. So also by going back to the basics, you're hitting the different positions, you're learning the different movements, and you're also getting the variation. So by the time you get to those higher on the level 3 and 4 movements, you're going to get a lot more out of it.
And for those of you who are beginners to training and just wanting to learn about jumping and when you should do it, make sure you're doing it on grass or you're doing it on a rubber floor. Try to stay with the concrete. Now, it's not always a perfect world. We definitely do our stuff on concrete occasionally, and we definitely do our stuff on pavement occasionally because that's all we have. But we try to move towards the grass and the turf and the rubber flooring as much as we can, so there's no shin splints or things like that.
Are you doing jumps on mats at all? I know that's a big thing in the track and field community here.
No, we're not doing any jumps on any mats. We very seldom even do them barefoot. If they ask me, hey, coach, can we do them barefoot, I'll let them. But it's not something we're focusing on. We're just focused on getting those different planes of movement attacked and put into the workout rather than using mats or using barefoot, because on the field you're not barefoot. The field there's no mats, so we try to make it as specific as possible.
Exactly. I think people get too carried away sometimes with trying to reduce the impact of the jumps with mats and things like that. I mean, if you have an injury risk with an athlete, that might be something to look into. But one thing to remember with jumping is that, as with sprinting, as with any type of movement, you want the stiffness in the body, and you want to be able to get that reactivity out of the ground. So, the foot comes in and you want to come back up. And if the ground is soft, you're not going to get that same reaction out of it. And so that's something to keep in mind. If you're working on harder surfaces or even grasses, it's softer but still has firmness to it, and that's what the field of play is. I think that's the deal to look forward to, is just to try and be able to replicate the field of play you need, and that's going to help you the most.
And the way to distinguish things is, like we've always done 48 hours between jumps, and so Mondays and Thursdays or Tuesdays and Fridays, and we've talked about multi-throws with med balls. We usually do them on opposite days, so we go med balls on one day, and then jumps on another day. So an example would be a heaving med ball on Monday, a jump circuit on Tuesday, a pressing med ball circuit on Thursday, and a different jumping circuit on Friday. And therefore, you have your 48 hours between jumps, 48 hours between multi throws, and you get a good amount of contacts with both, and you hit on different emphasis with both.
One last question, and something you talk about quite a bit, you've mentioned a bit earlier, is that you have to think about the volume of jumping your athletes are doing outside of the strength conditioning plan. So a volleyball player in an hour practice is going to get hundreds of jumps in. Basketball player also. How does that impact this type of progression you have? If you have a volleyball player, will you alter their volume here, or will you? Is the main impact the fact how you've set it up? It's mostly low amplitude stuff, so it's complementary to the work they're doing on the field.
No, what we'll do instead is they have a lot of vertical jumping that they do. So we probably will stay away from any type of vertical jumps. Like, for example, star jumps, jumps with knees to chest, jumps with heels to butt probably aren't necessarily needed. So what we'll do is we'll focus on a plane. So we might do speed skaters, lateral squat jumps, things like that. That will, not emphasize the vertical as much, but more the frontal plane movement than anything. So, and the volume will be cut a lot lower than it would be normally. So we would cut out all the vertical based jumps and do more plane. I guess you could say plane based jumps, sagittal. Sorry. Frontal plane.
Yeah, that's important to keep in mind. Just think about the volume they're doing outside, see how you can complement it, and also we all have our athletes for a limited amount of time. So why spend time training something that they've already been doing so much in their other training? Try and think about how you can add value and where the most bang for the buck is going to be. It's $1 a day, but you can use that dollar differently.
And as far as volume per workout, like I said, everything's based on what we're doing in the weight room. So, my workouts are set up, which we've talked before. We have 4 different weeks in a cycle. And the first week is base week, second week is volume, third week is unload, fourth week is performance. So if you're doing it by sets, you pick a number of reps, let's say 5 reps each, or 30 yards. It's always 30 yards when we're doing jumps moving. If you're doing 5 reps each of them, the first week would be 3 sets, the second week would be 4 sets, the third week would be 1 set, and the final week would be 2 sets. If you just want to do 1 set of jumping, because you've got a lot of things you got going on, the way we'll do it is the first week will be 8, the second week will be 10 reps, the third week will be 4 reps, and the third week will be 4 reps, and the fourth week will be 6 reps. So
8, 10, 4, 6, right?
10, 4, 6, or 3, 4, 1, 2.
Yeah. Well, great. I think that's a good overview of how jumps fit into your program, how you came up with this philosophy, and how you're implementing it with your athletes. We'll have the videos here of the different routines and an outline of what that covers. So hope you guys can enjoy it, and hopefully you can implement it using training like I have with my athletes. So thank you, Nick.
Yes, sir.